Hey, this is Sarah with Kuva Media, and I'll be walking you through some best practices for slide designs. Now, it's not the most exciting topic, but it is an important one. The design and the quality of your presentation templates can definitely affect your use cases, whether you're creating a custom slide deck for sales, for education, internal training, whatever that looks like. These are going to be some tips that are really going to help you maximize that visual effect, not only for communication, for persuasion, but also to help people actually maintain and absorb the information. Now, design is a lot more powerful than people realize. It's not just aesthetics. It's not just to make things look good. Design can attract certain people and it can repel certain people. It can help you see information in a more organized way, or it can be a jumbled mess and not make any sense at all. And there's so much to design psychology, but I'm going to give you some very basic tips that are really going to elevate and bring up your slide deck game. I know it's kind of an odd topic, but trust me, you're going to enjoy this. So as it is, this template is looking pretty great. It's fine. It looks very nice. Now at Kuva Media, we specialize in creating, we do branding, we do high-level brand strategy based, again, in design psychology and sales psychology, the ethical side, to really connect with your audience and really deliver and communicate to them how they want to be and need to be communicated to let them know that your service is for them. And in order to do that, branding, of course, like I said, plays a huge role. So that's something you're going to want to think about. Now, the design of this slide deck, we create all kinds of brands. We create all kinds of designs. We can do any design at Kuva Media. This one is going to attract and repel certain people. So that's number one that you want to think about. And within design, you have colors. Colors can affect people. Gradients, shapes, and fonts. Typography is a huge one, which I will dive into in another video, but typography can also influence how people feel just by the visuals. So I'm going to focus more on the accessibility, legibility, and effectiveness of the structure rather than the actual design elements, but I wanted to give you guys a preface of kind of what we're looking at as a whole so we can zoom in to this micro of how do you organize visual elements, especially typography, so that it's visible for your use cases. So first you need to think about, why am I doing this? Why am I building this? Is it for sales? Is it for education? What format is it going to be in? What size will it be in? So even the size of your typography and the size of the elements, those can be very much affected if it's on a giant screen at a conference, or is it on a mobile screen on landscape, or is it on a laptop screen? Is it embedded in a website? Is it projected? There's so many. Is it printed? You can even get these printed. There are a lot of considerations within that. So the size and colors of your typography are going to be important. So again, we're going to focus on kind of the more practical points of how you organize the data and how you present it. Typography is going to be huge. Color is a big one. Some people, as far as accessibility goes, whether people are sight impaired or have, not able to see color the same as other people do, or they're just sitting in the back of a room at a conference and they can't see the dang screen. There's different reasons why you're going to want to do this for everyone. So right off the bat, and we did not do best practice on this so that I can actually show you in live time how this works. So first off, font is fine. It is a sans serif. It's got some good height, so this is going to be legible. Only issue is we've got a very light gray here. This is not really going to work. You can see it, but I'm looking at a very bright laptop screen. That's not necessarily going to work. Say, if I print this, it's not going to be as visible. If someone's looking at this with a dimmed screen, they might miss it. And if it's at a conference, I mean, most of you know when you're working with a projector and not a screen at a conference, typically it's going to be a little bit dimmed. So you want to make sure that you're really getting your contrast right. That's step number one for your colors, especially your typography. So I would say that this needs to be a darker gray. So we will fix that. And the gray is nice because you still have a little bit of contrast with this dark color, which is not total black. That's another tip, is you don't actually ever want to use total black in your designs, unless it's an aesthetic choice. Reason being is the actual full color black is never found in nature, except for black holes. And so it's actually unnatural to the eye. So subconsciously it creates, if you use color code 000,000, which is true black, it actually creates too much contrast and makes the mind uneasy because it is not a natural color found in nature. And our whatever subconscious brain knows that. So you're always going to want to use a color that is almost black, but not quite black. So now that we've corrected the gray, much more legible, but then you still have that design contrast, which is lovely. You can use different weights of fonts to make different things stand out. So here we have obviously a large size, but other than size, because this is all the same font, but it looks completely different. Other than size, you can also do weight. And weight is going to be, this is kind of skinnier. This is probably a regular. This is probably a semi-bold as well as this one. So the weight of the font can make it look like a different font, but really give you visual hierarchy to help break up information and make it make sense. When you look at this, you see the main title, you see a subheader, and then you see a little bit of a description. So your mind is able to understand that information very quickly. So that's another way that you kind of break up information very easily, by just using color, by using weight, and by using organization. Since this is from top to bottom, that's how people are going to read it. This gets a little bit into UI as well. Some of this is congruent, which is user interface, for those of you that are not so tech savvy. So, we fixed this. This looks much better. As far as there are other things we would want to fix, like, moving this over a little bit, but we're just going to do a quick run through. All right, second page. Let's see if you can find, I'll give you just a few seconds here. What would you change about this page to make it more legible, accessible, and easier to digest the information? I'll give you just a second. So what I would do is, these colors are borderline as far as accessibility. There actually are contrast ratios of how dark a color is to how light a color is when it comes to these things. So it is pretty darn borderline. It might pass. I would actually have to put it through my tool, but a good way to kind of work around that, if you're not quite sure, make it bigger. Make it a heavier weight of font, make the font larger, and typically that is going to help a lot. The smaller that a font is, the higher contrast you're definitely going to need to make sure that that's legible at any size or brightness that you're going to have this presentation showed. So we're going to bump up the size here. And as you can see, it just really makes a huge difference. And we'll do the same with the bottom one here. So this is size 12 and size 11, way too small. Anytime you're unless it's an academic paper or some other application where you're going to have smaller sizes and people are going to expect that. When it comes to a presentation and when it comes to anything digital where people are visually taking in information, the larger the better, the simpler the better. And you want to give it space to breathe, which is what I love about this template. So ideally, you're always going to want to have things, my favorite is 16. Some fonts are smaller than other fonts, like they just rendered smaller, and you might need to bump it up to 18. And in some cases, even 14 is fine. In some cases, 12 is fine. You really just have to look at your application and what that's going to look like. So as you can see, as we're bumping up the size for this, it's getting more and more legible the larger that it gets against that background. And you always want to give it some space to breathe. So just by changing the size, we've made it much more legible, even with a questionable amount of color contrast. We're going to want to do the same thing here. Way too small. Now, when you're doing these, again, Kuva Media can do them for you. You don't have to do this, but if you're watching this, it's highly likely you already have a slide deck and you really just want some best practices. So this is really going to help. You know, when you bump up sizes and things, you're probably going to want to rearrange it. You know, what I would personally do is probably bring this in a bit more and just give it some more space so that the mind, when someone's looking at this, they can take it in a bit better. I'd probably pop this out a bit, make that a bit larger, that kind of thing. See how much that makes a difference? Huge difference. But we're still keeping a little, you know, still keeping space between these elements where they're not totally squished together. But as you can see, total difference even from this, and this size, you know, even was already enlarged. So really big difference right there. And then you'll also notice here, other than the font weight, they're also using colors. We are using colors to differentiate different parts. So again, really easy for the mind to go through and go, oh, there's 4 modules to this entire presentation. That's always good for people because they know what they're in for. You get the title real quick, sweet and short description. You don't want to go too heavy on slides. That is a big mistake that a lot of people make. It's better to have lots of smaller slides with points that you expand upon instead of an entire novel on a slide. Those of you that are in the legal field watching this, I know sometimes you kind of have to, but if you can, just try to do bullet points or split it up, give it some space to breathe. It's a little bit easier to digest. So, same thing here, way too small. Here is another example of where that's just too small. There's also too much content, probably. Because if I make it larger, what's going to happen is it's going to go right over the edge, and it's going to kind of ruin that beautiful little box that's going on. And I could move it up, but it is also going to change the amount of space, and it doesn't quite feel the same. It looks cramped. So depending on your template, this one, you can't change the size of this, but you know, you have the option to, I always say, if you can, shorten content. Make it short and sweet, make the speaking long, but make the visual short, because you always know what your content is, but you want people to visually digest this properly into smaller points. It really is going to help them kind of understand your content better and absorb it for later. And again, some of these you kind of have to play with a bit to get the sizing right and all of that, but that's ideally what we would want to see, where it takes up a bit more room, still has some space to breathe. You can even change the line height. That is also another tip that you can do if it's not quite fitting quite right, or it's too snug. That is a big one. So if we pop it down to single, let's say that someone is reading this on a small application, or they're way back in the room of a conference, that's going to be a bit harder to read than if you actually change the sizing. Sometimes it looks a little awkward if you're got it too large, so that can be more of an aesthetic choice, but usually a 1.15 or 1.5 that's kind of built into Google is going to do it. It can also help you get content in a bit better. So all right, same thing here. The content is just too small. So those are my main tips. Is when you're designing slides, first you want to make sure that the sizing of the typography is right. You want to make sure that the font itself is good, it's legible, it's easy to read. And then you also want to make sure that you're creating some kind of differentiation. If all of these were the same color and all lined up, it would be a lot harder to understand the content and what's going on. Whereas when it's kind of separated like this, it's more pleasant to the eye. When minds are at ease, it's much easier to persuade and educate. So that's really what you want to do here is you're helping people actually digest the information that is helpful to them. So you're helping them twofold. You're not only delivering valuable information, but you're doing it in a format that is enjoyable. It's peaceful. So this is a twofold way to help your audience, whether that's students or people that you are selling solutions to, whatever that looks like. And then you always want to make sure that there is a healthy breathing room. You don't want to cram everything into one thing and have like a giant novel. It's very hard for people to kind of digest that, especially if you're speaking. So if you're speaking, you really want bullet points. You want it short and sweet. You want it beautiful because people are going to be looking at the bullet points and absorbing what you're saying. So again, this is actually helping them retain the information that you're delivering in a much better way. So I hope that this was helpful to you guys. Subscribe, hit the like button if you found this helpful, share it with a friend who needs to know, especially those of you who are slide stuffers and put an entire research paper on one slide. This is for you. Thank you guys for joining me, and I hope that this was helpful.